Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another Dokkan battle video, and today I want to do kind of a fun video that I've been thinking about for a little bit, but I want to do a video that is the top 10 worst EZAs in Dokkan history, and obviously this is my opinion. If you have different opinions than me, feel free to hit me up in the chat, but I just want to kind of explain what I mean when I say like worst EZAs. So to qualify this, so you guys understand what I'm talking about, it's not necessarily like that these are 10 of the worst units in the game, or that there wasn't maybe characters that, you know, they maybe performed maybe better than some other characters released, but it's on EZA, the characters almost seemed useless, like right out of the box. And they felt like they just didn't get nearly enough, right? And these are units that you're probably going to look at and be like, oh yeah, I barely use that unit, or I never use them. Because the idea with EZA, and I think these units got particularly shafted because the idea with EZA is it's supposed to kind of rejuvenate these units and bring them back and make it so you want to use them again, right? So these are units that pretty much didn't really get that rejuvenation they needed. They kind of just went right back into the box after they're getting their EZA. A couple of other things about this is I'm only going to be ranking summonable Dokkan Fest and LR, so this won't include like free-to-play units or banner units. There's just way too many of those that got bad EZAs to try to like all put in a video, so I want to really focus on like premium top tier summonable units. And then the other thing is this is not going to be like in any particular order, so this is just going to be my top 10, but like I'm showing Golden Frieza first. It doesn't mean that he's number 10 or that he would be number 2 or whatever. It's just I just want to show you the 10 that I looked through my box and I said, yep, these units all got really bad EZAs. I never used them, and there are reasons why their EZAs were bad. And a lot of it is that they weren't good enough for the content that was around when they got their EZA, right? And I think with some of these units, it's that it's almost like their EZAs were designed like a while before they came out and they didn't properly update them to the current content, right? So let's go ahead and start here with the first unit I want to talk about on my top 10 is Angel Golden Frieza. This is a unit who EZA'd, I want to say within the last 2 years. He's not like the oldest EZA out there, but he's probably somebody you just never use, right? And what I want to do with these units is look at their kit and analyze like why are they so bad, right? So the big thing with this Golden Frieza is he just gets some base stats on start of turn, but then this is a unit that had a negative in his kit that they kept. And I feel like by the time this guy got his EZA, Dokkan should have been done with putting negatives in kits. And there's another unit on this list that has a negative in their kit that they kept on EZA. But this guy actually lowers the stats of superclass allies. So you really, and here's the thing that's crazy too. This guy has two things with him. So he gets stats on start of turn. All enemies attack minus 15%, which is good. But then attack minus 7 for superclass allies and enemies, right? And then he gets another stat boost if there's a superclass enemy. So he has a restriction that he's only good against superclass units. This guy was released when all the hard content was red zone, which was only extreme enemies. So that part of his kit didn't bode very well for him. And then he gets attacks effective against all types if you have a Reps of Universe 7 category ally attacking in the same turn. Well, guess what? Most Reps of Universe 7 allies that you want to run are superclass. So they're wanting you to run somebody that is going to get stat debuffed with him in order to get that buff. Like, it's really bad. Obviously, you'd want to run him with the physical Angel Golden Frieza, but he wasn't usable when this guy got his EZA. So he came out at a really bad time. He's got negatives in his kit. They want you to run someone on the team that gets the negative part of his kit. And he's only good against enemies that were not the hard content in the game. Like, this guy just had way too much going against him. Just an unusable, terrible unit, right? Let's go to the next unit. So I think I made my case for Angel Golden Frieza there. This is the very recent one, right? And then this is the STR Jiren. This is going to be the most modern unit that made my top 10 list. This guy was literally dead on release. A lot of you guys will be familiar with this guy because he's a very new EZA. JP recently got a bunch of like really good like Jiren and like Universe 11 stuff, and this guy just does not even make the cut for the team. Like, he was a dead on arrival EZA. The big thing with him, he's always had this thing where he can like stun all enemies, which is a really good Super Battle Road ability. But we don't need units that are good for a Super Battle Road anymore, right? Like Super Battle Road is really easy content. Like obviously they're going to keep that in his kit because it was a part of his original one, but they have to do something for this Jiren to make him runnable in like modern content, right? So he gets attack effective against all types against one enemy. Sure, that's fine. But the big thing is he gets damage reduction, but they only gave it to him if you're facing 2 or more enemies. Well, the really hard fights where you want the damage reduction is going to be 1 enemy. So he's not even going to get that 30% damage reduction, which, by the way, isn't really enough to save him anyways. He needs like way more than that. And then he gets a high chance to stun the enemies, and then he gets like extra stats, can perform a crit against Universal Survival Saga or tournament participants' enemies. He's got way too many things that are conditional, right? Like his stunning and all of that is really built for Super Battle Road, which, you know, isn't really a lot of where you'd want, like Universe 11 really needed him to be good because there aren't a lot of Universe 11 units. So it's really bad that he's not good in like general content. He's only like really good in Super Battle Road. And then they restricted him even further by making it so he gets extra stats and crits. So he gets the crit only when the enemy is stunned. So once again, that's not going to apply to most hard content. And then he gets the big 111% attack and defense buff only against those 2 specific categories. Now, granted, the current 9th anniversary content, there is a lot of tournament participant in Universal Survival Saga category enemies. But this guy just gets walloped in there. Doesn't even matter. Like, it's so bad. So this Jiren just does not have enough because his only defensive mechanic other than raw stats is 30% damage reduction, but there has to be 2 or more enemies. So this guy is literally just a dead duck. So dead on arrival, he's a unit. I EZA tried him once, was like, yep, he's garbage. He doesn't put up enough damage to make it worth running, right? At least like my LR free-to-play Yamcha, sure, he's not defensive enough, but at least he puts up big numbers, right? And he's got dodge. Like, you know, you can compare, like we could compare LR free-to-play Yamcha to every unit on this list, and it's like, yeah, he's just better than them because he can at least dodge and he can do a lot of damage, right? Okay, the next unit on this list, this is the 3rd unit we're going to talk about, is this physical Vegito. Now, the big thing with this physical Vegito, there was a little controversy with this guy because some people really defended him, some people really didn't like him, right? So let's just look at his kit, right? So he has damage received from normal attacks minus 80%, and he counters. Defense 150, attack 20 with each attack received up to 120. Medium chance to perform a crit. Key, +1 up to 3 plus an additional defense up to 90 and chance of performing a crit every time the character receives an attack 3 times in battle. Okay, so this character I would say definitely, like, if I were to rank these, this guy would maybe be more like 9 or 10. Like, he's definitely not the worst of the batch. He's usable at least, right, in terms of an EZA because he has big damage reduction. The problem is his damage reduction is only against normals, and they made his damage so bad, like laughably bad damage, that it's so undertuned to the current content when he EZA'd, and this guy isn't that old. Like, once again, within the last 1.5 to 2 years, this guy EZA'd. He's not crazy old. His damage is laughably bad to the point where his against an actual hard boss, his counters won't even deal damage unless they crit. And even if they crit, sometimes they might not, depending on what the boss is. So the people that praised this guy said he was good because of the damage reduction against normals. And against hard content, if you have a unit that can survive normals, that is good, right? Definitely good that you can survive normals, but he's not really doing anything else for the team. Like, if he had a support passive or something, I think he would have been viewed a lot better. But because he's basically doing no damage, he doesn't have any dodge or anything to protect him from a super. Like, a super on this guy is instant death. A scouter would have been great on him because because this is a character that wants to get hit to build up, right? So wanting to get hit with 80% damage reduction is fine, but it has to be a normal. So this guy is just the biggest RNG gamble because any super is instantly going to kill him. And he's a unit that, like, you'd want to build with a full dodge build to protect against that. But then you're working against his kit because he wants to get hit to build up. So they were just way too afraid of this guy. And Dokkan has a history of being very afraid of counter units. They're worried about making them too powerful. but they way undertune this guy. I think either you got to really crank up the damage to make him like the risk of running him worth it, to give him the damage to you know, make that risk viable, or if you keep his damage the same, that's fine, but just give him 1 or 2 more defensive mechanics. I think if he had built-in Scouter, I think he would immediately like shoot way up and be way worth running. Or you give him a really nice support passive. I think either of those would have been enough to make him not even be on this list. But he was, I think, 1 good defensive mechanic short of making it off this list. But I would say overall, I personally was very disappointed with him. And even though there is an argument that surviving normals is a good thing, he literally is doing nothing else for the team. He's just eating up a slot. So I think he definitely was one of the more shafted EZAs. Next one on the list, this is the 4th one. This is Int Kid Boo. Now, he's a little bit of an older EZA, right? So we can judge him based on when he came out, right? We don't want to judge him according to current content. I think the problem with this Kid Boo, if we look at his kit, it's very basic, right? He just gets attack 100, more stats if HP is 30% or more. He gives Majin Power Extreme Class Allies Key, and that's it. So, like, even for when he came out, like, I like that they tried adding a little support with him, but he didn't give any attack or defense buffs. And I think probably the worst thing for Int Kid Boo is that the Boo Saga team just, like, the extreme Boo units weren't, like, in a top tier place. Like, he didn't really have a great team at the time that he EZA'd, and he was just so basic. He was just, like, you know, I think on release he was just, like, okay. But he just instantly, like, phased out. Like, you didn't really have a place to use him. You never really wanted to use him. He was just a very out-of-place EZA that didn't get a very impressive one, and his team just wasn't there. And that's pretty much all there is to say about Kid Boo. Just not impressive at all. All right. We can't go through any type of, like, top 10 shaft without talking about my boy, Super Saiyan 3 Broly. This guy is infamous for being one of the worst units in the game on release and on EZA. Well, we'll talk about on EZA because he isn't, like, as bad. Like, surprisingly, this guy would probably be more on the bottom 5 of the list for me, not the top 5 worst. And I'll explain in a minute why. But first of all, look, he's got one of the best stickers in the game. So I'm praying for this guy to have, like, a really good Super EZA. And I think they're going to finally get this guy right on the Super EZA. But let's just look at his kit, and it's going to be very easy for you to tell why this guy is terrible. He has attack and defense 120 at the start of turn, another additional 12% attack, and negative 6% defense per key sphere obtained. Medium chance to launch an additional super with 3 or more tech key spheres obtained. So the idea behind this guy is they wanted him to be a nuker, and they really wanted him to be an offensive powerhouse, but they made you sacrifice defense. So one reason his EZA was a shaft was they still gave him negative defense. Now, it's not as bad as it was. And the reason why this guy maybe wouldn't be my #1 worst EZA, because he wouldn't be actually, is because on release he actually was playable. Because defense, you know, defense wasn't as important at the time. Like, you could have 80k starter turn defense when this guy dropped and you would be fine. And this guy at least had a very strong attack stat for the time. Like, when this guy EZA'd, he was hitting like 4 to 5 mil attack stats, which actually was top tier damage at the time. So at the very least, he did kind of what you wanted, like what the devs were kind of building him to do, was to be a very offensive powerhouse, but maybe not as defensive. So even though his kit seems like, his kit is by far the worst out of, like, every unit on this list. The only reason he's not the worst EZA is because at least he was usable on release and he did competitive damage. But other than that, I mean, he's a unit that you wouldn't have used very much, and most people probably didn't use him at all. And his negative defense didn't impact as bad as people thought it was going to be. Now, on Super EZA, they better just make him gain defense. Like, please get rid of that crap. Please. And yeah, I mean, I expect this guy on Super EZA to be hitting like 30 mil shots, right? But obviously the negative defense, not a good thing. You can't have that. Super bad. So yeah, that's obviously why this guy is here. Just a really major negative in his kit, and never has really been like a top tier unit that people want to use. The only thing with him, like, on release, that was back when, like, he was the, like, extreme tech leader, right? Like that was back when like type leaders were the thing. So if you wanted to run extreme tech, like you wanted him like for the leader skill. But yeah, he's just always been such a bad unit. And I think the reason why they got away with him with that negative defense since release is because the game really didn't hit that hard and you could kind of get around it, right? But yeah, just a terrible unit all around. So yeah, he definitely deserves to be on top 10 worst EZAs because they left the negative in this kit. They got to take that out on Super EZA, right? All right. Then we have Int Goku Black. Now, this is one where I actually like kind of didn't even want to put him on here. I actually kind of like Int Goku Black, right? The reason why people don't like his EZA is because he's maybe a little bit weak early on and it takes him a bit to build up. But at least this guy has a place where like if you get really long content, he actually can do pretty well. And I do plan to showcase him when we do get Red Zone Movie Boss Rush. So for me, this guy probably would have been like right at number 10 on this list. I feel like he's the best of the units that I put on this list, right? So if we look at his kit, you know, attack and defense 80, he's got key at start of turn. He gets stats at the start of each turn. So that's one thing is he's got to like wait 3 turns to build up those stats. And then he's a stacking defense unit. He gets stats for each attack received. So he kind of wants to get hit a little bit. And then he transforms. And then when he transforms, he actually gets really solid when he transforms, right? And then he does continue to stack and he gets a nice support passive. So like this Goku Black at least has some nice things in his kit. Whoops, I didn't mean to spoil the list there for you. You guys totally didn't see that. This Goku Black, I get though why people didn't like his EZA, and I do think he is still considered one of the more underwhelming EZAs because I do think they should have given him more because early on in base he is really, really weak. And modern, and that's the reason why, even though I kind of like him, it's because he's really good in long content, but that isn't, most of the hard content isn't long enough for this guy to show off and be good. And most really hard content, especially this new 9th anniversary stuff, will just punish you very early on turn 1. Even when this guy came out during Worldwide, like, you know, Physical Zamasu, like those fights, and I think that's ultimately why, right? When this guy released, which was Worldwide of last year, the hard red zone fights like Metal Cooler red zone, Zamasu red zone, they were very short fights. So this guy came out as a unit that wants to be in long content, and they didn't really have content for this unit to shine. So that's ultimately the big part of it. And once again, early on, low defense and wants to get hit. I think they should have given him, for at least the first few turns, give him like a really nice like 50% damage reduction, guaranteed guard, something like that. Like he needed another defensive mechanic to help him early on. It didn't have to be permanent, just for some turns to help him build up. And I think that's really where they missed with Int Goku Black. And I think people were extra upset because the team actually really could have used him. So yeah, that's definitely, and I get that, definitely one of the more underwhelming ones, right? As a side note, he's not on my list, but I will throw him out as an honorable mention in that kind of one of the counterparts to this guy, a unit that released around the same time, is the STR Super Boo EZA. Now, he's not on this list because he actually got a pretty good EZA. The problem with STR Super Boo is he was just a poorly timed EZA where Boos had like nothing going on at the time, right? So, and people do like right now have tried to use him on the Boo team, and especially when you need like an STR unit for that mission. I've even used him before if there was like an all types mission, but he's definitely like not good enough. So yeah, that's the STR Boo isn't on here because his EZA was actually pretty good. It just, his team wasn't ready at the time, and now that his team is ready, he's just been outclassed, right? All right, anyways, moving on to the next unit on the list. We have LRCFIA Caulifla. This is the unit that actually kind of wanted me to make this list. This is the unit that just kind of sparked me thinking about, man, they just got such a bad EZA, and it's so disappointing, right? And this is an example of a unit that they were literally the best unit in the game on release for, what, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. Like, they were just on top of the game. Like, they were such a good overtuned unit. It was actually kind of crazy. And I don't know if it's just that the devs felt like they needed to downplay them because they were so dominant for so long, or they were afraid of them. But yeah, their EZA, I mean, if you go in here, they barely tweaked this. They only added like a couple of lines of text and upped a couple of numbers a little bit. And this is a unit that was so disappointing because I remember using them like the night before their EZA, because they were a unit that, surprisingly enough, pre-EZA, they could still be kind of usable because they were so dominant and they could stack defense. You just had to have a really long fight and really prioritize them. The problem was I used them the next day after their EZA, and I literally felt like I was using the same unit. I did not notice much of a difference. They still stack defense, but it stacks really slow. They have to get a ton of attacks in. You got to prioritize them. I've used them recently on like new Universe 6 builds, and they really struggle because you can't put them in slot 1. And you've got things like STR Kefla in there, STR Kale. You've got AGL Kale, who all of these units, they're built on doing tons of additionals and doing a lot of damage. And this unit in slot 2, they are not even getting the benefit of their full stacking, because this is a unit that wants to attack 3, 4, 5 times a turn to really stack their defense up, and that's when they'll actually look decent. They just can't do that because of the rest of the units do too much damage, and if I can't put this unit in slot 1, the boss just loses too much health most of the time. So it's a very disappointing EZA because they're a new enough EZA that they should be usable on the Universe 6 team, and they struggle, man. They are not worth running, and I really like this unit and want to use them, and I really like Universe 6, and this was really kind of a dead on arrival EZA, and it's really, really disappointing. Now, I am going to try them. This is another unit I do want to feature in Red Zone Movie Boss Rush when we get it, because that is long content, and I want to get them in a really long event to see if I can get them to shine a little bit. But once again, it's the same issue that Goku Black has. Most of the hard content will just crush you too much early on when you're weak. The fights won't be long enough, especially because when you're doing these fights, you want to run good units. And good units are going to be doing 15, 16, 17, 20 mil attack stats, and they just take down the bosses too quick to give you the time to stack up, right? So that's just the issue with Kale and Caulifla, right? Let's go to the next unit here. AGL Bardock. Very obvious. Actually, a lot of the same issues that Kale and Caulifla and Goku Black have. He is a stacking unit that needs time to build up, and he's just way too weak early in a fight. He does get benefits for having low-class warrior on a team. He gets benefits for going against Wicked Bloodline. Both very not common things, right? Low-class warrior isn't a great category, so you have to run units that are maybe suboptimal or subpar to really get the best out of him. And you have to go against Wicked Bloodline to get the best out of him. You don't have to have those things to run him, like he's runnable without those, but that's really where he's going to shine. So like this unit's best event is the Legendary Frieza event, which is very mid-level content. Like it's not very hard. And he looks great in there, but you try to bring him into any type of real content that isn't that, and he just gets crushed. So yeah, just a really underwhelming EZA for Bardock. I think he's a newer one, so we're all pretty familiar with him, right? When you get it stacked a little bit and you get into Super Saiyan Bardock, he can do okay, right? So just because the units on this list, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily unrunnable or that they're terrible, but their EZAs were just really underwhelming, and you have to use some of these units only in certain situations, right? All right, LR Majin Vegeta. This guy is probably tied for my like kind of most hated EZA that they've ever released, because this is a unit I adore and I love, and I wanted him to be ridiculous on EZA. This guy was 100% a dead on arrival EZA. This guy had the most, like, an EZA that made the least sense that I've ever heard of in my life. Like, this is one where the devs got way too much into, we need to follow the story of what this Majin Vegeta was doing. We have to follow, like, what was going on in this scene in the anime. Like, they were way too much into the story of this unit and tried to make his kit follow that, and it just crushed him, man. So what am I talking about for those of you unfamiliar? Well, if we look at his kit, he's got some starter turn defense. He gets a bunch of attack while performing a super attack. He does get damage reduction, right? 20%, like they tried. But here's the thing. You have to have a Bulma on the team. Now, you might be thinking, well, STR Bulma is still a god. But when this guy released, that STR Bulma was nowhere in sight. And by the time she came out, this guy was even more off the grid and unrunnable. So they literally released this guy without a proper Bulma to activate the damage reduction, which was probably the most important thing in his kit that he needed, was damage reduction. So that's the killer, okay? Then he gets Ki 2 and another attack and defense 20 when there's a Kid Trunks on the team. The Kid Trunks was a little bit easier to activate when he came out, but not ideal that you wanted to be running like Kid Trunks on the team. Like there wasn't like a super dominant like must run Kid Trunks that you wanted, right? I think it was like the physical banner unit Kid Trunks is like what people were using, and it's too bad. So just he had two really bad requirements that like weren't ideal to meet, that had actually pretty big chunks of his kit, right? And then key 2 and chance of performing a crit plus 20 when the name of an ally who is attacking in the same turn or an enemy includes Goku. And then he gets 12 key and performs a guaranteed crit if HP is 30% or less. Like, dude, this guy's entire kit pretty much is all terrible conditions. That's about what it is. The whole thing is like terrible conditions. Key 12 and guaranteed crit, 30% or lower HP. That's unrealistic. Unrealistic to ever get that, right? You can get the 2 key and 20% crit for having a Goku around. Sure, that's okay, I guess. But you're talking about, like, for this guy to be at max potential, you need to have a Bulma, a Kid Trunks, and a Goku on the team, or a Goku enemy. And you have to be below 30% health to get this guy's full kit activated. Like, that is insane, ludicrous, way too much to expect. Now, what I'm getting at with all of the lore here, this is the Vegeta that is sacrificing himself to Majin Buu. It was right after, like, he was hugging with Kid Trunks, he knocked him out, and he does the big speech that this is for Bulma, for Trunks, for his family, for Kakarot. Like, he's doing, like, this is the Vegeta that's, like, getting emotional and, like, actually is, like, caring about his friends and family. So they tried to incorporate all of these specific characters into his kit. Pretty much everybody that was mentioned in his farewell speech. And terrible. Like, so now that he has that, unfortunately, it has to be in there for a Super EZA. What I hope they do, they have to give this guy a lot of things in his kit that are unconditional to make him runnable, and then just minimize what he's getting from all of these specific conditions, because it's ridiculous. So anyways, this is the unit I probably blabbered on the most about, but they just shafted him ridiculous, like terrible EZA. This guy is probably contender for #1 worst, but I think that the unit I'm saving for last, I think might actually be the worst one. But this guy's like right up there, might be tied. But this one, and I believe this is the last unit on my list, it is. So this here, I would say between this Gohan, the Majin Vegeta, these two are probably like either tied or like 1 and 2 for worst EZAs in Dokkan history. Now this guy is so unfortunate. This guy definitely got the Kale and Caulifla treatment in that on release, this guy was like the best unit in the game and ridiculously good. The problem is that he was so hard to pull that the average player couldn't actually enjoy him while he was good. And by the time most players got him, he wasn't good. And then, yay, we finally get his EZA. So I'm one of those players, right? Like, I never owned this guy when he was good because he was so hard to pull. And you had to be a super duper uber mega whale. For those of you unfamiliar, this guy was only, so get this. This was, I believe, 2nd anniversary. So the only way you could summon for this guy, he wasn't even on like an anniversary banner. You had to summon on the main banners, and you got tickets for a side banner. This guy was unfeatured on the side banner. It was either unfeatured or he was featured, but there was like 20 featured units. So like you had to summon to get tickets. You couldn't just straight summon on his banner. And then you had to get lucky with an insane, ridiculously hard drop rate to get this guy with tickets. Like one of the worst summoning mechanics ever for a unit, like so stupid. And so when this guy was top tier, like most players just could not even have this guy. And then he finally gets his EZA, and one of the most dead on arrivals EZA I've ever experienced in my life. And once again, like Majin Vegeta, extremely disappointed because I love this character's art. I love this card. It's kind of ironic too, that this Gohan and the Majin Vegeta, they were the first ever units to get super attack animation revamps. They actually like went through and made new animations for them, which was so hype. And then they just turned them into garbage, trash EZAs. The hope is this guy too. This is another guy I want super EZA to save. If you look at this guy, they literally just gave him defense and that is it. And it's a minuscule amount of defense. Just enough to make him like somewhat runnable defensively at the time. They literally gave him no attack, no new attack in his passive. He's a nuker that did not even get more attack per sphere, right? Or he might have gotten just a teeny bit, but like nothing, like basically no attack. So this is a guy that I like. Kale and Caulifla, I used him pre-EZA and post-EZA. He was doing like pretty much the exact same attack numbers. And the big thing that maybe the devs forgot about when they EZA'd this guy, LRs do not get stat buffs like base stat buffs on EZA. They only get passive upgrades. So without a stat buff upgrade, not giving this guy attack basically made his damage stay exactly the same. So this is a unit who, my gut feeling, is meant to be a very strong offensive unit. They turned him into one of the weakest offensive EZAs that ever released because he didn't improve from pre-EZA. And then his defense was just okay. So he has no support, no like any like big time dodge or damage reduction or any of that. Got no offensive stats to speak of. Terrible. Worst EZA ever. I think this guy is my #1 worst EZA. So now, like, if I'm going to go and like actually rank these, right? I would say like, you know, like the Goku Black and like this Vegito, they're more on the bottom end. They're like 9 or 10. Like they're still usable, whatever. But yeah, I think Gohan is #1 worst EZA of all time. And I'm going to put Vegeta there because of all the wonky things. And I would actually put Kale and Caulifla maybe at #3. They were just so disappointing. They basically got nothing, right? And the whole premise behind this video is not who is the worst unit. It's who got the worst EZA, like the least upgrades, did not get what they needed. This unit got almost nothing. Almost nothing. They got like one short line of text in a couple of little bumps, you know? This unit, most of his upgrades, ridiculously, unrealistically conditional, right? No attack. Like, are you kidding me? No attack. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think of this top 10 worst EZA list. Remember, I'm only talking about Dokkan Fest and summonable LRs. If there is a Dokkan Fest or summonable LR that you think should have made the list that didn't, let me know in the comments. If you agree or disagree with anything, please let me know as well. And please let me know if you like this video and want to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you all on the next one.